Ladies and gentlemen, 1 week away in Las Vegas, Nevada, my guests this week have every intention of being the new World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions.
Hogan knocks Fuji down. Hogan closed down, and down goes Yokozuna. Hogan drops away. Hogan in the cover. No. Hooks away. And Hogan. Hulk Hogan by the time will leave it.
When you see them coming, better run for cover. Girls, you don't need a weekend lover. American males. If they want to talk to you, you better not listen. You might wind up in critical condition. American males. 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 American males.
Hello there, you lovely set of people, and welcome once again to Wrestling's Worst Podcast, where we celebrate some of the utter shite that has been delivered from the wonderful world that is professional wrestling. And today, guys, it's part one of a two-part special called The Hulk Hogan Show, where we are going to look at times where Hulk Hogan has played that little creative control that he always likes to have in his back pocket. And up first, guys, in part one, we're going to take a look at a time where Hulk Hogan was at his utter worst, and that was Wrestlemania 9.
He ruled the ring for over a decade. This April 4th, live on pay-per-view, the immortal Hulk Hogan returns. Wrestlemania.
Are you ready for the Survivor Series?
Who will survive?
Just like that. Take a look what
Now, WrestleMania 9, it took place in 1993 at Caesar's Palace. And many people will say it's probably up there with one of the worst pay-per-views, worst WrestleManias at least, that WWE's ever done. And most people are probably correct. What probably didn't help the pay-per-view was the fact that everybody was dressed in togas. You had this Roman, it was at Caesar's Palace, so you had this big Roman theme. Everyone looked fucking stupid. Probably only one shining light from the pay-per-view was the fact that it was Jim Ross's pay-per-view debut. But the card itself, there was only like 2 or 3 matches that were passable. You had Shawn Michaels and Tatanka. Bit of a dodgy ending, it wasn't too bad. Luger and Perfect, Steiners and the Head Shrinkers. The rest of the card was pretty abysmal. You Undertaker and Giant Gonzalez. You had Doink and Crush. You had Bob Backlund against Razor Ramon, where that's your modern day bringing a legend back against an up and comer. But then that is bad in itself. But then the pay-per-view gets even worse. Hulk Hogan plays his little creative control card that he carries in his wallet and takes over the pay-per-view.
Tell you what, I can't think of a better individual who can share with us his perspective regarding just who is going to be the new World Wrestling Federation champion, 4-time champion himself, Hulk Hogan. You know, Ted DiBiase said something about it. What in the world happened?
Well, you know something, Mean Gene? I just left the WWE Champion's dressing room, Bret the Hitman Hart, and the one thought I want to leave him with was that all the Hulkamaniacs and Hulk Hogan are in his corner. But you know, the last couple months, these seem to be the times when people do step over the line. First off, with my bionic brother Brutus, and then last night, leaving the gym here in Vegas, I guess money can buy certain liberties around this town. They took it out on the Hulkster brother, but the little Hulkamaniacs pushed me towards the ring. You know, Bret Hart, a warning to the wise, brother. You're a brother, you're a Hulkamaniac, and since so many people are stepping over the line, I want you to watch this Yokozuna and Mr. Fuji like a cat, brother. I want you to watch every move, and I also want you to know, brother, that me and all my Hulkamaniacs are on your side. But as I looked into the eyes of Bret Hart just a few minutes ago, Mean Gene, I know the power of Hulkamania. I know the greatness of Hulkamania. And as I looked into Bret Hart's eyes, I even questioned Hulkamania's own greatness. That's why right now, Bret Hart, I'm issuing a challenge to either you or the Jap, brother. Whoever wins the WWE title, I want the first shot at it. But let me tell you something, Mean Gene. With me, all my Hulkamaniacs, and the attitude that Bret Hart has, I guarantee you, dude, the WWE title is staying right here in the WWE, right here in the US of A. And what you gonna do?
That's good enough for me. As a matter of fact, I'm calling the sports book right now. Ladies and gentlemen, standing by, our colleague Todd Pettengill out in the audience.
Now, no one can doubt the credentials of Hulk Hogan. After all, he was the face of the WWF during the rise to the top of the wrestling world during the 80s. Simply put, Hogan was the man. That being said, by 1993, the dynamic had changed completely within the wrestling world's interest in Hogan, and Hogan stepped away from the WWF ring in February of 1993 for the first time since WrestleMania 8. When he did finally make his return, his real-life friend Ed Leslie, who was Brute's Beefcake, he had a parasailing accident and had to have some metal plates fitted into his face. The WWF at the time, they played this into a storyline with the $1 Million Man and IRS attacking Beefcake. This prompted Hogan to return to the company, and the stage was set for Money Inc., DiBiase and IRS, to defend the tag team titles against Hogan and Beefcake, the Mega Maniacs, at WrestleMania 9. Now, Hogan was unsuccessful in an attempt to win the gold, but still got his hands on some a little bit later in the show. After the main event of the night, which was Bret Hart defending his WWF Championship against the winner of the Royal Rumble, Yokozuna, Yokozuna got the victory, and Hulk Hogan appeared to console his best mate, let's say. All of a sudden, Mr. Fuji challenges Hulk Hogan to an impromptu match. Hulk Hogan steps in the ring, big boot, leg drop, 1, 2, 3. Hulk Hogan is now a 5-time WWF champion. Now, Hogan, he went on to state in an interview, he said, basically, it was a case of when the promotion and I did not get along, and we couldn't reach an agreement on the direction we wanted to go. We had contrasting ideas, creative differences. You know, Vince McMahon had other wrestlers he wanted to place in the spotlight, and at the time, I thought that Hulkamania could generate more interest. He thought otherwise. Instead, then, believing that Hart wouldn't be a draw and having issues with the size of Hart, Hulk Hogan then, he'd face Yokozuna at June's King of the Ring event, dropping the title to Yokozuna, and at the same event Bret Hart went on to be crowned the King of the Ring. That would be Hogan's last appearance on a WWF event until 2002. In fact, he sat out the remainder of his contract other than appearing on a European tour in August 93, which he had already promised to do so. Not once did Hogan appear on WWF television in the 70 days between winning the title and dropping the title. 1993 was completely different to the current product where the champion appears and usually wrestles week in, week out, but even still, a few tape promos and that was it. Now, if Hogan would have been motivated and wouldn't have been a bastard, and would have been willing to use this run at the top to help establish new stars like your Bret Harts and your Shawn Michaels, it would have worked, and more importantly, it would have paved the way for a series of brand new set of main eventers. What we got instead was uninterested WWF champion who rarely appeared on television, Brock Lesnar. He refused to put anyone new over and wouldn't even drop the belt cleanly back to Yokozuna. At the King of the Ring event, there was a Japanese photographer where his camera blew up in Hogan's face. So yeah, he wasn't even willing to even put Yokozuna over clean. He had a lack of interest, and the crowd also had a lack of interest in him. And maybe at the time he'd fallen out of love with wrestling as well, or a combination of it all had just got too much for Hogan, and he just couldn't be bothered. Or maybe it was 1993 now, and the fans just didn't buy into Hulkamania.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go to Howard Finkel for the official decision.
The winner of this bout and new World Wrestling Federation champion, Yokozuna!
Now, even as a kid watching WrestleMania 9, then watching King of the Ring 93, and seeing the hot potato with the world title, something didn't feel right. I remember even watching it at such a young age. Because you had Bret Hitman Hart was getting pushed as the icon of the new generation. You had Hulk Hogan was the icon of the golden generation of the 80s and the early 90s. And it just didn't feel right that they never got pushed together. But Bret Hitman Hart, he gave a recount of the controversial situation, let's say, in an interview. He went on to state, on April the 2nd, 1993, I went to my room just in time to answer a call from Vince, who asked me to come into his suite to talk. I knocked on his door and he answered it with that goofy grin. We sat down and Vince said, "This is what I want you to do. I want you to drop the belt to Yoko tomorrow." Now, this is not what I had expected. I sat there dumbstruck as he went on to explain how Fuji would screw me by throwing salt in my face, blinding me. Now, after Yoko had handed the belt, Hogan would rush in at my aid, and in some kind of roundabout way, Hogan would end up winning the belt from Yoko right there and then. Like I was handing Vince my sword, I told him I appreciated everything he did for me and I'd do whatever he wanted. Vince said, "Don't get bitter, I still have big plans for you." Sound bites flashed through my mind of Vince assuring me that I was the long-term champion and not to worry about Hogan, who still hadn't even spoken to me yet. As I stood to leave, I asked, "Did you take the belt from me because I didn't do a good job?" "Of course not. I'm just going in a different direction. It's still onwards and upwards for you, nothing is going to change too much for you." I was totally crushed. As I lay in bed that night, the more I thought about what Vince had in mind for Hogan, the more I felt it would completely backfire on both of them. The hokey finish would stink, maybe not immediately, but in the weeks to come, my fans, who were the biggest contingent of Vince's paying audience at the time, would gag on it. There was something different about my fans. They really believed in me as a person. By the time I got to the dressing room the following afternoon, word that I was losing the title had leaked out to the boys. Most of them were quiet and some were angry. The Nasty Boys, Shawn, Taker and several others expressed their utter disappointment. Knowing I was losing the belt didn't stop me from planning on having a great match. I went over everything with Yoko and designed the match so that all the best moves were left to the final minute. Hulk arrived with his entourage, his wife, manager, Beefcake and Jimmy Hart. Clearly he'd been in the know all along, probably from the first day he came back. Now he was suddenly acting like my long-lost pal and wearing a big smile that rightfully belonged to me. During our match, it was hot and dry in the desert heat, but a cool breeze made it impossible to work up a healthy sweat. An exhausted Yoko stamped like a runaway elephant, shortchanging me on my comeback and editing out all my best spots. I was furious that he would take it upon himself to go home on his own. That's how I came in to find myself crouched low, desperately hanging onto Yoko's two massive calves in the sharpshooter, fighting with every ounce of strength not to let go. Fuji was caught off guard by the sudden ending, and it took him forever to find, unwrap and throw a packet of what was actually baby powder into my eyes, supposedly blinding me. I fell back as Yoko hooked my legs and Hebner counted 1, 2, 3, right on cue. Hogan hit the ring, protesting the injustice that had just been done to me, and Earl put on that classic expression of utter stupidity that all pro wrestling refs wear when convenient. As I feigned blindness, Hogan helped me out of the ring. Fuji stayed in the ring, challenging Hogan to a title match with Yoko right there and then. Yoko still teetering from exhaustion and looking for a second wind that wasn't there. Hogan blinked in astonishment at his sudden good fortune. As scripted and with my face buried in the crook of my arm, I waved at him to avenge my loss. Go get him, Hulk. I was really thinking, go ahead, Hulk. Take from me what I worked so hard to get. We'll see just how long you last. Hogan was champion again without even having a match, and before I'd even made it backstage, he simply ducked the powder Fuji threw in his face, clothesline Fuji, dropped the big leg on Yoko. I could hear the 1, 2, 3, the roar of the crowd, and Hogan's music thumping. I couldn't help but stare at the TV monitor, watching Hogan work the crowd with the same old posing routine, a hand behind his ear, shaking the world belt in the air as if to say it belonged to him all along.
And down goes Yokozuna. Hogan, that's all. Hogan to the cover. No. That's the leg. Hogan. What a time to believe this. Hogan. I don't know what's going on here. Hulk Hogan has won the title. The winner of this bout. Listen to this crowd.
World Wrestling Federation champion.
Hulk Hogan's the new champion.
Yokozuna had the title for 3 minutes.
A few minutes later, Hogan came up to me excited and said, "Thank you, brother, I won't forget it. I'll happily return the favour." I looked my old friend in the eye and I said, "I'm going to remember that, Terry." As for Yoko, I was a little pissed off at him for going home on me and not letting me show Vince, Hogan and everyone else that we could tear the house down without their bullshit finish. Even so, it was the best match that Yoko ever had. On May 29, Vince called me at home to tell me the big news that I was getting the belt back. What I didn't expect to hear was that he was getting ready to call Hogan and hated the thought of telling him that he was too old and tired for a company whose marketing strategy was now based around a new generation concept.
With the fall and departure of Hulkamania from WWE, this wave of brash, unapologetic, and charismatic superstars displayed an explosive in-ring style unlike any generation before it.
Vince wanted to make Hulk Hogan the Babe Ruth of the WWF and use him more of a special attraction. He asked me not to say anything until he had spoken to Hogan. 10 days later, Vince called again. He warned me that he was about to tell me something that would make me really angry. Hogan was flat out refusing to put me over, saying I wasn't in his league. What a bastard. Vince had decided that Yoko would be getting the belt instead. I couldn't believe that Hogan would do this to me. I remember him shaking my hand at Wrestlemania 9 and telling me he'd happily return the favour. Vince said he'd have one more meeting with Hogan to try and sell him on it, but if he didn't go for it, I'd work with Lawler at SummerSlam instead. Hogan didn't go for it. I wanted to believe that Vince hadn't told me the whole story, and I made up my mind to confront Hogan as soon as he dropped the belt to Yoko. I'd wait till then, because it didn't seem right for me to change Yoko's destiny. Now, it's common knowledge that Bret Hart he's gone on to, let's say, be a bit of a bitter man in his later years. He's said a few outrageous statements.
I agree. Rollins is not that safe.
Okay.
He's heard Sting. He's heard John Cena. I mean, he's heard some major stars.
This, from what has been reported, is 100% legit. Hulk Hogan just point blank refused to drop the belt to Bret. It was simply down to Hulk Hogan believed that world champions should be 6 foot, 7 foot tall, steroided up meatheads. And this technical guy that Bret Hart wasn't the wrestler that suited a world champion and wasn't the wrestler that suited to carry the company in Hogan's eyes. So for Bret Hart, for the remainder of the year, he was involved with Jerry Lawler, with SummerSlam. He had the 4-on-4 with his family against Shawn Michaels and the Knights at Survivor Series. And then he goes on to win the Royal Rumble with Lex Luger in '94. And then to go on to take the title off Yokozuna at the following WrestleMania, WrestleMania 10. Now, Hulk Hogan, during this time, has then departed from the WWE. He's gone. He's now over in WCW, trying to relive his youth, let's say, before he goes on to bigger and better things with the NWO. But for Bret Hart, because of Hulk Hogan being an utter bastard, he wasted practically a year of his life. Because it was a year fighting people like Jerry Lawler and Shawn Michaels and the Knights on the undercard. And now on the flip side, We did get to see the build-up and the eventual match at WrestleMania 10 with his brother, and that obviously goes on into 94 with their match at SummerSlam. But for Bret, for me, Hulk Hogan, he were an utter bastard during this period of time. They should have had that passing of the torch match, so Hulk Hogan could have drifted off into the sunset to record his films, and Bret Hart would have carried the company with the biggest seal of approval in one Hulk Hogan. By the time Hart and Hogan were under the same promotional umbrella again, it was 5 years later in World Championship Wrestling, and the New World Order was on its last legs. That didn't stop the powers that be within the company, and you know who that was. From booking a swerve that saw Hart fake a knee injury during the match, get Sting to replace him, then turn on Stinger to ignite a feud between the two. So really, Hart and Hogan still couldn't agree on a clean job for either.
Ways to hurt you. You're not kidding. That spinning toe hold just grinds so much, it really turns a knee the way it shouldn't go. He shoves the referee, and that gives us a crystal clear message that he's in this thing to injure a man. Sting! Sting has come out. Remember, Hogan made a challenge to either Sting nor Bret Hart, and Bret Hart took the challenge. Sting pulls Hogan up.
So that was part one of this little special series into the life and times of the 6'8", 303 pounds Tampa Bay bastard that is Hulk Hogan. Coming next will be part two, where we're going to take a trip over to WCW. It's Bash at the Beach 2000, where Hulk Hogan is in full creative control.
And let me tell you who doesn't give a shit about this company. That goddamn politician Hulk Hogan. Because let me tell you people what happened out here in this ring tonight. All day long I'm playing politics with Hulk Hogan because Hulk Hogan tonight wants to play his creative control card. And to Hulk Hogan, that meant that tonight in the middle of this ring, when he knew it was bullshit, he beats Jeff Jarrett.
So guys, as always, thanks for watching, and don't forget you can check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Facebook, just search for Wrestling's Worst Podcast. Twitter, it's WWPodcast20. Also, we are now on the Swerve Talk Network, along with the Ruthless Aggression Podcast, which was myself, CJ and Mike. Obviously, give us a shout if you don't already know about us. Swerve Talk Network also has the Max Wrestling Podcast, and you may have heard Daz and Butcher on previous episodes on the Wrestling's Worst Podcast. All our links, they're all on Twitter, all on Facebook, so check us out. But guys, as always, thanks very much. And Hulk Hogan,
You bastard.
When you say that I'm coming, better run for cover. Girls, you don't need